So the topic today, gender. I know for me, 20, 30, 40 years ago, this wasn't a thing for us, and I didn't grow up having a class in our church about gender identity. I have a lot of college students that work with me, and I've had a lot of interesting discussions, and feel very somewhat ill-prepared in conversing with them about it. They're coming from a very different angle, a very different perspective, and I'm hearing things from parents too coming in. Kids come home from school and asking questions, and just kind of like, wow, how do I answer this? And so, as the parent team got together and was thinking of topics, we thought this was something that needed to be talked about. And when we talked to Nick about presenting, he was gracious to accept and say, yeah, I've got a lot to say. He says there's enough information. We've given him 45 minutes, and I'm sure he'll say that's not enough time, but there's a lot of resources that we're going to be providing, and we'll talk about that towards the end. So I'll hand over the mic. And thanks, Nick.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Appreciate you guys being here. 45 minutes is plenty of time to say 45 minutes worth. And so we'll do that. With a topic like this, you have to kind of make a bunch of assumptions before you start. So if I'm not assuming a start kind of like where you would like me to, I apologize. There's 100 different starting points I just have to pick one, right? It's like paddling down the Wisconsin River. You got to decide to put it somewhere and take out somewhere. And so I'm just gonna do that. I'm gonna start in a place where like the majority of Americans are, where they realize this is a big issue. They realize this is a big issue for some people individually, personally for them. They're also kind of scared poopless about like all the stuff that's going on and wondering how their kid's gonna get affected by it. They don't, if they're Christians, they don't know necessarily like where in the Bible talks about this, or like is there Christian theology on this kind of stuff, right? Like, and how does this work, and then how do we parent relative to it, all that stuff. Okay, so I'm gonna go through a few things. A couple ideas will be more pastoral, meant for your emotional uplifting, because I'm known for that. And then there'll be some conceptual stuff, and then there'll be some direct application, like here's what you can do right now at the end. Also, I have 20 copies of this, but it's probably better to get this electronically. So if you give Aaron and Curtis your email address, I can send you the version that has links you can click on those. But I made a handout that has a bunch of my gender dysphoria, trans resources, broken out into like therapists, books, articles, YouTube videos, documentaries, so you can kind of work through whatever you feel like you would want to look at. And then at the end, I have a series of getting at the premises. So one of the things I'm going to say is, if you're dealing with a kid who's like got some gender ideology stuck in their craw, instead of just like going directly against that, generally what needs to happen is you need to work at some of the premises down here. And so I have a bunch of these discussions. Also, if you want to prepare your kid not to get taken in by the more extreme forms of gender ideology, instead of just saying gender ideology bad, and then letting your YouTube raise your kids, if you instead give them the right premises about what a human being is, so that the worst forms of gender ideology seem ridiculous, as they are, then so when you inoculate, right, like a good, let me just start by offending some of you. Okay, so one of the reasons why getting COVID makes you more immune than getting the vaccine is not because the vaccine doesn't help you be more immune to it, but vaccines just work on like one area, and that's where it blocks a disease. Whereas if your immune system gets something, it has like 15 different levels where it has stoppings for that disease. So when you get a disease, you're usually significantly more resistant to it in lots of different ways because you've got protection on multiple different levels, right? So if you're a really sick person and those levels don't work great, then getting one really strong is fantastic. Or maybe adding is a good idea, but the point is that usually a natural course of a disease is better. That's how immunity works. Generally speaking, having 37 different understandings of the world, which make bad versions of gender ideology seem like nonsense, is better than having your parents say this bad. Does that make sense? So in here I've got 17 conversations you can have with your students about different premises in what is gender, what is sexuality, what are we as human beings, how does that function, what's my future going to be like, is it good to be a girl, is it good to be a boy, how does that work, and like questions you can ask in sub-conversations that you can have that relate to sports. Okay, so here's a couple things just up front. But one, if you feel like either you're crazy or the world has gone crazy, I just want to say, you're not crazy. Like on this particular issue, at this particular moment, in our time, especially in places like Madison, San Francisco, Seattle, places like that. There's like, it seems the media has the capacity to build a sense of consensus where consensus doesn't exist. More than 70% of Americans are against the medicalization of kids who label themselves as trans in any way, right? No puberty blockers, nothing. 70% of Americans. But you would get the sense from like stuff you hear on TV or the fashion stylists you see on YouTube that like everybody agrees that you should give puberty blockers to a kid as soon as they put on a dress if they're a boy, right? Even though sexual constancy, knowing what it means to be a boy or a girl, doesn't even exist cognitively to between 7 and 9 years old. So these are important issues. So most people, so the problem is that the majority of people actually aren't nuts on this. But here's the thing. You're not crazy, but you do have to remain calm. Because the reason why gender ideology is such a big thing in our culture is that it's an anxious response to the fact that we've screwed up our kids. For about 3 generations now, at least since the self-esteem movement. But what happens is the self-esteem movement didn't work, so we tried to fix it by an even worse philosophy. And we've done that like 3 times now. And so now we have so eroded a sense of reality that our kids are functioning in a cognitive chaos. They don't have enough structure to even know what they are or what world they're in. And so they're like they literally have to make up reality for themselves, which is not a good thing to have kids do. It's a form of child abuse. And so we have a culture that's ritually abusing our children, right? And so, you might see that. And if you see that, you could get really anxious. But the problem is that because our culture has created this, now they're seeing what it's doing to our kids, and they know they don't have an answer. It's building on its own anxiety. And so even though there's plenty of reasons to get anxious, we've got to be calm. Because being calm is half the solution, okay? The second thing is, you're not alone. I kind of went over that already. There's a huge majority on this that's terrified into silence. Somebody once said religiously about America that it's India ruled over by Sweden. Sweden's 80% atheist, right? The elites in America are extremely secular, very anti-religious, and they are the top 1.4%. And they're like Swedes. The rest of America is kind of like India. Pretty religious, sometimes in obnoxious, really bad ways, sometimes in reasonably good ways, lots of really intelligent people, lots of different versions of it, but not particularly anti-religious, and generally traditional. Like, let's not change everything. Like, we're human beings, right? And America is just kind of like that. So, like, we're a country of, like, people who, like, have cows and, like, drive trucks and, like, type at our jobs, ruled over by people who went to Yale and Harvard. Do you understand? And so because of that, there is this, like, crust of control all over our country in various ways, telling us what to think about stuff. And part of what you have to do as the populace is to sort of, like, you have to reverse the head patting, right? Like, in a way, they want to pat you on the head and say, oh, you stupid little plebeian American stupid person. You're so dumb. You need to be like, you're so out of touch. Like, you have no idea what a human being is because of your silly little philosophies that you got from your family. You know what I mean? So you gotta just, you're like, gotta relax, but you are gonna have to speak up, like, have you been to a school board meeting? Like, the reason why these things are happening is because it only takes about 2.5% of a group of a population to completely move a population over 15 years in their ideology. Whoever's more committed wins. That's why Christianity won in Rome. You know that, right? I mean, it was like, none of those Romans that became Christians saw the risen Jesus. They believed the people who were willing to die to tell them about the risen Jesus. And those people were way more committed than they were. Right? And so in some of this stuff, like, again, slide 1, you gotta keep calm. But if you do nothing, you'll get, right? The third thing is, as I said already, our kids are hurting. Right? I have a book in my office written by a youth ministry specialist from Fuller Seminary. The title of the book is Hurt. And it's about Gen Z and younger. That we have created a culture that has created an incalculable amount of hurt for essentially millennials and younger. I'd say young millennials and younger. So people that are getting up to 30 now. I can't go into all the sociology of that, but it's really bad. A lot of it's followed the sexual revolution, a lot of it's a bunch of other stuff. But, and here's the thing about young people. Young people, because they're idiots, not that they're not intelligent, but they don't know anything about the world yet, and they don't know what they don't know. They're prone to what's called one-thingism, which is you have all these complicated problems, and you want a solution, i.e. you want something to blame. And generally speaking, you want one thing, one fairly simple thing, and one thing that you can connect with empathetically or emotionally, something that's close to you, right? And you think that if you blame the right thing, so it's the Republicans, it's the Democrats, it's the white males, it's the BLM protesters, it's some, it's like those people are making everything bad, right? And the thing is that for young people, what's the closest big thing that they can blame everything on? Parents, right? And if they're church kids, their church and their religion too, they can put all that together, right? That's why there was that joke. Remember did you ever hear the old website, Things White People Like? And it was like, believing in religions their parents don't follow, right? It's that kind of idea, right? Okay, so, now one of the reasons why this is the case is, okay, so I'm going to give you like a 3-minuter on why they're hurting, and it's a fairly complicated system, okay? So part of it is, there is this ideological cultural chaos. I can't go into the history of Romanticism and its expressive individualism and all of that, but we've gotten to the point where the idea of expressing yourself and finding fulfillment is everything. It's referred to by sociologists sometimes as expressive individualism. The point of life is to be myself and to express myself, and that's what life is for, and to be happy. So I have to be able to do it, and I need to let you do it. So empathetically, the biggest moral responsibility I have in my entire culture is to let you express yourself. And the biggest one you have is to let me express myself. And that's basically all morality is. That's why you think people secularly often think they can build an entire ethic off of empathy alone. Does that make sense? Because you can if that's what ethics is, right? And so the problem is, so then that produces, that's not what human beings are. Human beings cannot function like that. So you have a philosophy about human beings that is inhuman, right? Now the result of that is normativity chaos. So in order for human beings to function, what conserving a culture means is there's a whole pile of propositions that you actually need to conform to. Like, don't kill people. Like, don't steal. Like, honor your father and mother. You've heard of these before? Like, there's a number of these that every culture has. It's what C.S. Lewis in Men Without Justice, in The Abolition of Man called the Tao. Spelled T-A-O, in case you don't know that. Which is this idea that, like, every culture, like, generally speaking, cowardice isn't honored in any culture. Right, for example. And so there are these, like, things that you actually are supposed to conform to. And even the things that you don't have to conform to, the areas where you can do whatever you want, you know what those are because they're not one of the things you're supposed to conform to. So normativity doesn't just focus on how you're supposed to conform, it also tells you how you don't have to conform. And that differentiation is incredibly important for human life if humans are going to live together. Does that make sense? When those normativities break down, they collapse in a culture, then every institution that forms us and protects us doesn't have any moral authority anymore. And that's how they function, especially if you imagine that you're free. If you're free, but you have these institutions that form you and tell you what to do, the only way those institutions can do that is if they have moral authority. You believe you're supposed to participate with them. Does that make sense? Otherwise, you would think their hierarchies are just tyrannies and oppressions, right? So what happens is when normativity collapses, you get more corruption in the institutions because people start believing the institution isn't about the moral authority, it's about what I can get out of the institution, how much money I can get paid being part of the institution, what I can get people to believe and what power I can get, and then I can send money to my buddies, and you get more corruption, which makes people more confused about hierarchies and hate them more, which means your institutions break down. The problem is your institutions are the things that protect you, right? They protect you so that you don't need a statist government that will tyrannize you, but they also keep you from being out there by yourself as an individual. These are things like families, friend groups, churches, business arrangements, all these sorts of things by which we create circles of protection for ourselves and circles of opportunities for ourselves. When those begin to collapse because we don't have institutional stability, we are all kind of in the wind, including our kids. And security and safe opportunity and exploration is fundamental to development, especially away from depression and anxiety, and to the formulation of an individuality and proper bonding and differentiation, which is basically all of relational life. Like, all of relational life is like, so here's Steve and here's me. In what way are Steve and I one, and in what ways are Steve and I not one? So there's a bonding between us. Oh, Steve and I are friends. Steve and I are elders together. Steve and I go to the same church. Steve and I both believe in Jesus. We're one in those ways, right? But Steve isn't me. He has a different body. I have a different body. Rebecca's his wife and not my wife, right? There's all these different ways which, like, Steve is his own thing, too. That bonding and differentiation, getting those clear, is part of conforming and exploring and understanding how these dynamics works. When you don't have a context that's safe enough, kids don't do that well. And so then, they don't know how to relate to other people. Now, are you connected with this yet? Kids not being able to relate to other people? And then the question is there something I can do that's easier than relate to other people? Because relating to other people all of a sudden is really anxious. The answer is yes now. We have screens and basements and stuff, right? And Instagrams and so on, where you could sort of interact without really interacting. To the point where kids don't know how to have conversations. Like, the biggest comment I get about my family, you know what the biggest comment I get about my family is? We had a conversation with you. What a nice young man. He knows how to have a conversation. Because it's rare. Right? Okay, let's keep moving. So that creates, where are we going here? Okay. So that creates life instability, which young people are the most susceptible to. That is going to feed the mental health crisis. Because people, remember, mental health, there are only very few mental illnesses are biologically induced. Schizophrenia, bipolar 1 and 2, like you can almost count them on two hands. The things that are like literally just in your body. So a few anxiety disorders. Most mental illness is the chaos of the world is too much for what you can mentally bear. And when that chaos overwhelms you, there's some way you start to fall apart. That has a series of symptoms. That's your mental illness. Does that make sense? Now, people can resist mental illness on something like a bell curve. Okay? So, when a society is pretty safe for kids, only the tailing ends of the bell curve are going to be mentally ill, right? People who literally have schizophrenia, right? And a few people like that. As you start becoming more unsafe as a society, the number of people that have mental health issues increases directly for a little while, but then once it hits that bell curve, it starts to grow exponentially. And before you know it, you have 100,000 fentanyl deaths, and you have this many people in prison, and this many people joining riotous groups on the left and the right that are nuts, but they need something to belong to, and you get 25% of men exiting the dating pool because they think no woman is worth dating, and all the symptoms of either mental illness or profound psychological cynicism, or all the things that flow from people who have not bonded and differentiated well in a safe society in which they could be safe and explore in ways in which they could develop well. And because of that, and our kids do not understand that, they're going to blame you for it. And you're going to have to take it on the chin and figure out what you can constructively do with them. Does that make sense? Or teach this to them when they're like 7 at Family Emotions. Okay, now, in the midst of that chaos, what God has spoken and shown about sexuality and gender has very clear boundaries. And because of that, dealing with the gender question issues by being affirming, a la what Madison would like us to do, isn't really an option for us. Okay. Someday, things are going to swing too far conservative. Okay, that always happens in human society. Okay, things swing, huge swings back and forth. And right now, in this part of the country, right, we're doing a big, like, chaos swing towards liberality. If we just spare ourselves more, we'll be happy, okay? The time is coming, and is right now in other places. It's going to swing way back the other way. And then everybody's going to want us to be, like, conservative in some loopy way, and we're going to be like, no. Right? For example, I have given this talk in India. This is not what I say there. I talk about things like misogyny and good feminism and what it means that women are co-equals and what it means that women are in the full image of God and how, like, it's a totally different talk in India. Do you understand? Talking about gender. Because here's the thing. It's no good to run to a flood with a fire extinguisher. You have to know what's going on in your moment and what really is the bigger problem. Right? In the United States right now, okay, some of you might not agree with this, okay? Right now, this kind of, the advanced romanticism in the form of expressive individualism that tears down normativity, that's by far the bigger issue. We're in flood, not fire. The day is going to come when there's going to be a conservative reaction to that. And people are going to say, hey, these people are onto something. And it's going to whip back, and it might do that in like 30 months. It could be super fast. And we'll go from flood to fire. And at that point, you throw away the bucket and you get the fire extinguisher. And you've got to be ready for it. Right? But you've got to also know what you're doing. The people who believe the stuff that I'm critiquing right now, they are in charge of the media, the government, the hundreds of thousands of jobs in the District of Columbia, all of the universities, except 5 in America, virtually all secondary schooling, virtually all elementary schooling, all of social work, all of psychology, all of psychiatry, most of medicine, and I could go on. Like every place of cultural norm and power in the creation and care of people is overrun with this ideology among that 1.8% of elites that actually control what's going on. And you have to see that, okay? Now, That does not mean you have to vote for Donald Trump. You understand? I'm not saying that. You just need to understand which way the pendulum is swinging and whether we got flood or fire right now. Okay, listen. When I used to talk like this in Panama City, Florida, which voted 85% for George W. Bush, this is not what I said. Understand? There, racism was a bigger problem than progressivism. Conservative overruns in that part of the South was a bigger issue. So when I was there, I used the bucket, or the fire extinguisher, not the bucket. Here, it's bucket. You understand? And you have to have that clear in your mind. Otherwise, that's a different talk. Let's just keep going. Okay. People have said that gender and sex are different, and that gender is how you express the way you understand the way something like sex might be expressed. Okay? This comes from 1960s gender theorists who said the difference between gender or sex is your physical male-femaleness. Gender is your mental stereotype or ideology about how that sex is supposed to live that out in society. This is biological. This is performative. Right? This is physical. This is ideological. And so gender can be discussed that way. Okay? That is not what the word gender has ever meant for 4,000 years. Okay? So, if those folks can completely redefine a word, including making it mean literally the opposite of what it means etymologically, then that's what it means. Okay? The word gender that we have in English comes through the Old French where they added the D, from the Greek word genos. Okay? When the Old Testament was translated from Hebrew into Greek, the Hebrew word for kind, God created them according to their kind, was translated genos into Greek for the Septuagint before Jesus was born, because that's the right word. It means kind in Greek. What that means is that what genos means, that is, when you add the D, gender, is something replicated according to its biological kind. Now this is critical for our faith because the verbal form is literally the verb that says Jesus is the what of the Father?
Monogamous.
Right? Monogamous. The only genos. Get it? Mono, genos. The verbal form of gender, of kind. He's the only kind of the Father. So some translations say the one and only. Others say the only begotten. Because genos means begotten. So like when Lissy got pregnant, people said, hey, what do you have? And I was like, a human, I hope, right? Which is supposed to be funny. And the reason it's funny is because it turns on the idea that I already knew I was having a human. Because birth is generative. Do you hear that? Do you hear that word again? Generative. Genos. It's begetting. We begot a child. Alexi begot our children. They will beget other children. Genos. Gender. You see? And so that word's root literally means the opposite of what our culture says it means. That's why for years and years and years in English literature, gender just meant how you denote in the English language male or female. Gender was a literary term. It's not a sociological term. It never has been. And the whole etymology of the word literally means the exact opposite of what gender ideology says the word means. And that's one of the reasons why I don't want to give in on this word, because this isn't a word that's like has some arbitrary meaning like gestalt. This is a word that its root literally means that kind which comes from another kind in kind, which could not be more opposite than whatever you say it is. Does that make sense? And so that's supposed to be clear that our genos, or the kind that we are, in Genesis 1, is A, our humanity. Humans beget humans in kind. And our sex or gender in which we become able to beget in kind. Right? And those are both wrapped up in our genos, our kind, scripturally speaking. Does that make sense? And that's kind of a big theme in Genesis 1 in terms of how God creates. Okay, now, I don't know why that exists. How are you doing? Okay, here we go. This one. Okay. These are some slides that I showed to your students, so that your students saw that slide, and this one. Okay. Now, one of the reasons this is so critical is because a lot of people say that the medicalization of kids that identify as trans is all reversible, and is life-saving, and is medically necessary for them to have a happy life. Okay. It's not reversible. The drugs were not created for, and are not even okayed by the FDA to be used for what they're being used for. By the statute, federal law of the United States, every time these drugs are prescribed, an illegal action is being taken. The lawsuits are just getting going. But what's also happening is that The top and bottom surgery is neurological mutilation of the capacity to be engendered, that is, to beget. The act of sexuality is the act of begetting, which includes a certain realm of pleasure or human interaction, and also is supposed to be fertile so as to have the capacity to create human beings. Medicalization of transgenderism destroys both of those functions of gender. It is not affirming gender, because sometimes surgeries are literally called gender affirming care. They are actually gender erasing care. You are erasing the capacity for sexual pleasure and bonding that the sexual organs are created for. You can use phalloplasty to make a fake penis on a female body, but the nervous centers and the capacity for orgasm do not exist. Okay? And you can make a fake vagina in a male body if you use the right part of the colon to do it. But you do not, there is no clitoris. There is no physical sensation system that exists in the human person, so that when a man and a woman have sex with each other, there are full neurological structures so that they can each have pleasure one with the other in a complementary way in the act of generating. So that they can bond, enjoy, and beget. And in that, there is fertility, which is also erased. So a crass way to say this, and I said this to your kids, I said, listen, if you're like 17 years old and you maybe want to get married someday, and I say, listen, I can introduce you to somebody right now who you will never be able to have sex with such that they will have normal human sexual pleasure and they will be infertile. Would you like to meet this person to be your romantic partner? And I'm sorry, but I would have said, no, thank you. Maybe to be a friend, I wouldn't mind knowing such a person, but part of what I'm looking for in a romantic partner is somebody who can enjoy sex when I have it with them, and for whom that act could be generative. Does that make sense? One of the reasons for this is that we treat gender medicine sometimes as an affect of a single individual. The thing about gender is, it's fundamentally a pair situation. Sexuality is the only function of your human body that requires another human body to do its bodily function. Right? Most people don't want somebody else there where they poop. Right? You can eat by yourself. You can shout. You can just, everything your body does, you can do by yourself. The only thing your body doesn't do by itself is reproduce. You need another person for that. So gender and begetting, the engendering of gender, is fundamentally a pair-bonded system. It's not just about you. It's about pairing. Does that make sense? And this profoundly interrupts the capacity for the sort of pairing rooted in gender. Right? Now, how are we doing? Okay. Not great, but okay. So what that means is that if you understand God's statements about creation, and then you understand biology, these dovetail very well. Right? One of the things that I think is hilarious is, for most of my adult life, like Richard Dawkins has been my enemy. He's an atheist zoologist at the University of Oxford, hates religion, wrote one like the God Delusion is his book, right? He and I are on the same team on this. He's like, this is stupid, right? Or like, there are these people who are like, they're biologists. There's this woman, what's her name? She wrote The End of Gender. She's like, she works for Playboy. She's a sexologist. Oh, I can't think of her name right now. Anyways, Deborah Soh. So Deborah Soh is this like attractive Asian woman who everybody thinks is fantastic because she likes to talk about sex and everything. And I listened to her book, The End of Gender, and I wrote a 3,000 word review on it because it's amazing and horrific all at the same time. And she's just like, science is all that matters. I'm an atheist. I'm 100% pro-gay, and this stuff is crazy, right? She's like, because we who study sex scientifically know that this is all ideological bunk. It's totally unscientific. So you have like the zoologists, the sexologists, the evolutionists, like all these folks. The evangelical Christians and Catholics, basically. And then and they're like agreeing that this abstracted ideological belief of what a human being should be able to be, what is sometimes referred to as transhumanism. I should be able to become whatever I want to become, even if I need technology to do it. That is the third rail. And listen, I never thought that like atheist rad femme lesbians would be on my team. I did a podcast with a lady who started the Pride March in Milwaukee. Like the proudest feminist, like super rad lesbian you've ever met. I mean, like I couldn't see her Birkenstocks, but they were size 9.5. Like I mean, she was, and I keep interacting with people. I'm like, it's like I'm taking crazy pills. I'm like, how are we on the same team? We've always been fighting each other. It's like, well, we all think this is crazy. Because creational theology, a biblical understanding of the human person, is an embodied, physical one that takes as the starting point how the human person is as a biological creature. And so does science. It just has to. But ideology doesn't have to. You can always abstract your notion of something and pretend it's whatever you wish it was. And romanticism is like that. And as it's developed through radical ideologies, that's how it functions. And so it doesn't have to correspond to reality. In fact, reality is oppressive by its very nature. And I don't mean just like white men oppressive. I mean, reality is by definition limited. Limitation is oppression. You can't be what you want to become. So, let's make it so you can become it. Right? We've got technology. Let's get more. Right? And so, as this biological view and the scriptural view of the human person comes together, there's at least three things that we have to understand. And here's the reason why I'm telling you some of this stuff. Stuff that many of us assumed when we were kids, you have to literally explain now. The foundational stuff that you just like drank in with your culture, and that's how you were supposed to learn. There's a lot of stuff you're supposed to learn just by absorbing it. A little girl is supposed to know what it means to be a little girl by watching her mommy and her aunt and her older sister. That's how it's supposed to work. It's a much deeper knowledge. It's a much richer knowledge. It's a much more like unconscious knowledge. And a little girl like that can physically embody that knowledge better and release herself emotionally into it so that her femininity is more emotionally integrated into herself as a person. That is the most healthy way to learn how to be a little girl and then therefore to be a woman. And the same thing is true for little boys. Right? This is a much worse way to learn. But we in some cases may have to do that. Right? And so there's these three things you have to know and explain. One is that fertility is fundamental, nurture is fundamental, and culture is fundamental. Meaning this, in order for us to make human beings, we have to pair, and we have to be able to conceive. It's kind of important. The second thing is that we have to get together for long enough to raise the creature that takes the longest to mature of any creature on planet Earth. Even whales. Like there are sharks that live for somewhere between 400 to 1,000 years, but they still leave their parents in less than a year. Okay? We're getting to like 30 years old, they're still in our basements. Right? So like, this is an issue. And so, because human beings develop very slowly, and because human women are like the least efficient reproducers on planet Earth. Okay? Like if Rebecca had a month where she laid as many eggs as your average Asian carp, we would have so many Schmitz we wouldn't know what to do. It's like 40,000 Schmitz this month, you know. But she couldn't care for them all because we need maybe 13 years of care, right? And so the point is that like bonding isn't just about getting together for like 6 to 12 minutes to conceive, right? It's like it's like 18 years of care. And all the research that we've done on kids is that kids always do better with both of their biological parents living in the proximity of the same home, preferably with a brood that they have made only together. Now, that doesn't mean if your family can't do that, nothing good can happen. Okay, there are all kinds of things we do out of love or tragedy that are the best that we can do, and we work them. And kids can do good from any kind of family. But if you were going to bet on a kid that you didn't know anything about, right, and you liked your money, you would bet on a heterosexual family of married parents caring for their own biological children in a single household. There is no structure or family unit that comes close to that, right? One of the reasons we have the church is because some of our families just can't pull it off. And so that's why you have all these other institutions of safety and other institutions around you, so that anybody who's faltering for whatever reason, or something tragedy happened, or something that didn't work out, we're all there for each other. But you see, like the mental illness, you can only carry so many of those people. All of us have to be trying. Right? When a culture doesn't even try to form families like that, then 60% of the families aren't like that. If everybody's trying, you're still going to have 11 to 30% of the families who just can't pull it off. Somebody dies, somebody leaves, somebody turns out to be a narcissist, something bad happens. Right? And so everybody has to be trying to pull this off to have a level of not pulling it off that can actually work. Does that make sense? Okay, and then culture is, we have to then pass stuff not just from me to you, but in such a way as that you can conserve it and transmit it. right? Now, so there's those 3 parts, but then culture has these 3 parts. And these are really important, because these are the things that we have lost culturally, and you have to reteach culturally. They are normativity, liberality, and provision for exception. Okay, these are really, really, really important. All 3 of these are completely misunderstood in our present culture. Okay, normativity is the things for which we are morally obligated by the natural law to conform to. Okay, so I'm a human man. There's certain things I have to do because I'm a man. Right? I had to find a woman. I had to treat her like one. There's just some things that I felt like I need to conform to. There's other things where there was a range of possibilities, but they were closely related to my gender or sex or my humanity or something like that, right? And then there's other stuff that I can do what I want. Now, the reason why normativity is so important is normativity for a people of liberty or people who think of themselves as free is the negative laws are the only things you can't do. You can do everything else. The difference between that and a totalitarian state is you can't do anything unless you're explicitly told you can do it. So in the old Soviet Union, you couldn't do anything you didn't explicitly know that you could do. Right? Now, this is why people are concerned about bills being passed by the government that have thousands of pages that nobody's read. Right? We have laws that nobody really knows about. One libertarian group, I think it was in the Cato Institute, said the average American commits about 11 felonies a day. Just laws you've never even heard of. Right? And that's what communism was known for. It's like one of Stalin's generals was known for saying, you show me the person, I'll tell you the crime. We have enough laws on the books that if we want to get anybody, we can. Right? Liberty is about the idea that there is a very set number of obligations. And you are to conform to those. They are your responsibilities. Think 10 commandments. Right? You do those 10 things. Everybody has to do those 10 things. And there's a billion other things you can do what you want. Right? What tends to happen in a culture that doesn't have this straight, and it's not according to faith or natural law, is these will get inverted. Think about this. Imagine a young man who says, I'm a woman, and I'm against freedom of speech. It's dangerous and it hurts people. See what's happened there? He's actually flipped these two. Right? The thing that is unchangeable, that he actually has an obligation to conform to, is his sex. The thing that is actually in the area of liberty, where things have to be able to move and experiment and go around and work with people's preferences, are people's ability to understand ideas, express them, and interact, which requires freedom of speech. Right? Speech is a realm of liberty. Sex is an area of conformity. Our culture, if you do a survey of people under 18, let's say, a huge pile of them will say you can be whatever gender you want, no matter what sex you are, and freedom of speech is bad because it hurts people. This idea of liberality being broken by inverting normativity and liberality is a huge issue. Now, one of the reasons why this is important is if there's plenty of men in the world who hate church because men who thought masculinity was just one thing called them sissies. Or worse. I've talked to men who's like, listen, I remember being 6, 7 years old in my church, and this big man called me a fag. And they're 40 years old, and they're crying. Right? Because that guy, besides being an idiot, didn't understand normativity versus liberality. You can be a boy or a man and not look just like this guy. Right? There's lots of ways to be a man. There's a few things in order to be a man who is productive and generative you're going to have to do. And then there's a whole scale of things that you don't have to do. You don't have to shoot guns. You don't have to go fishing. You probably are going to have to get a job. Right? Okay. And then the last thing is provision for the exception. Within any structure of normativity, there's going to be some people who can't pull it off. For one reason or another. It may be their fault. It may not be their fault at all. So 0.003 of 1% of people are born with very, very strong gender dysphoria that starts very young and doesn't abate. Some percentage of those people feel like the right thing to do is to systematically transition. Right? I frankly don't know what to do with that. I still probably think that's not the right thing to do, but what I do know is that person is totally different than the 15-year-old girl who hates her body, who got talking with some of her friends at school and labeled herself as non-binary and then got on a chat room and then figured out what to tell her doctor and got on testosterone. Those are totally different cases. The first one is the exception that proves the rule. The second one is not an exception, and we need to be able to know that. Right? This is why some people, especially Christians and atheistic evolutionists and sexologists, are like, this is crazy! Because we're getting so many false positives. If you don't know what the exception actually looks like, then anything that wants the benefits of the exception can just sign up to be the exception. Right? And that's really problematic. And so there are some people that they're just going to be different. And if you can't say, this is a person who's different, and they're so different, it makes obvious that we're not, and we can commit to this norm. Right? In Christianity, celibate intentional singleness would fall into that category. There's lots of single people, there's lots of married people, but somebody's like, I'm not going to get married, I'm just going to follow the Lord. And you're like, okay. I mean, most of us are going to have to get married, so there's humans, but 1 Corinthians 7 says that you're a rock star if you can do it. So awesome, right? But it's also sort of the exception that proves the rule. I mean, Paul knew very few people would do that, right? And so in this case, when we look at gender ideology, within a secular mindset, because it's so focused on empathy and inclusion, if you have one exception, you can't allow in any way for that person not to be fully included. So anything that would differentiate that person has to literally go away. And because that person can't live up to the norms, you literally have to get rid of all the norms. To the point where literally there are congressional hearings referring to women as menstruators or birthing persons because you can't say mother. At St. Mary's downtown, NICU nurses have to say, would you like to chest feed to new women who do not identify as men, who are just normal women? They're not allowed to say nurse or breastfeed. Why? Because there could be an exception somewhere. And if that exception was a man who wants to nurse, and you say nurse, and that assumes breasts, and he doesn't have breasts, but he's a woman, then now you're excluding him so you can have the norm. The problem with that is that you can't have any positive proposition in your entire culture because there are some people who can't live up to everything. So what are you going to do? What you have to do is you have to be able to let the exceptions be the exceptions and recognize that they prove the rule, they don't disqualify them. So you can honor those people and you can include those people in your community because you don't have to feel like they're a threat. Right? You acknowledge their position and where they're at. And you embrace them. Right? And in a church like ours, you know that we have LGBTQ-oriented people, right? People who are men who are gay-oriented and they can't do the woman thing right now. They can't, right? But they're here and they love Jesus, right? And the answer is awesome. There's provision for you. There's a place for you. A full, complete, honored place for you. Does that make sense? And if you don't do that, then what happens is people who really care and are emotional and empathetic come along and they destroy all the norms because you're hurting those people. Because we are. Does that make sense? Okay, so I gotta get moving here. Okay. Within the Bible, additionally, there's all kinds of clarity about sexuality. One, there's no trajectory on making sex more promiscuous. Right? It starts with basically, if you want to get a divorce, get a divorce. You get to Jesus, you can't have a divorce unless there's literally adultery and maybe one other exception. Look, the fluidity about sexuality gets narrower because the more we develop as human beings spiritually, the more God shows us about ourselves and our sexuality, the better we should be at mastering our sexuality and holiness. And so the more focused he can get in what he tells us to do. So it's not you couldn't be promiscuous in the Old Testament because we didn't have the pill and we didn't have penicillin, and so you could get syphilis. So he wanted people not to have sex with each other, but now we can do whatever we want. That is a bogus biblical argument, right? In every possible way. Chaste self-control is completely possible. We're post-Freud, and so everybody's addicted to sex. We've so sexualized our culture. The average young man now is seeing pornography the first time at 8 years old. We are entirely pornographied culture. It's destroying. I don't know if you know this. Do you know the number one way young men are identifying as trans right now? They're coming into contact with, what's it called? It's called, is it sissy hippie porn? Sissy hypno porn, I think is what it's called. And it's a certain kind of pornography that is self-immersive. You're a participant in which you are treated in a derogatory female stereotype, but then you participate sexually as a kind of kink. And what that ends up doing psychologically is there's men who are I did that for 6 hours and I was trans. Mentally, my mind was already functioning like I was a woman. It's unbelievable. It's hypnotic. And some of these organizations are whoa, Tiger. They're this is crazy. But you can go get it on YouTube tonight. You have no idea how weird the human mind is, right? But Jesus is listen, if you don't pornography your culture, if you don't engage in a lot of promiscuity, if you don't feed your mind sexually explicit material, and you treat other people like subjects rather than objects, and you get a hold of your own body, and you practice self-control, you can live celibate and fully human like Jesus did. Right? The idea that you have to have sex in order to be holy and happy and fulfilled is a lie from the romantics on the continent, the dead white men who smoked pipes, and a number of them, Austrians, killed themselves. Okay? It's just a terrible idea. It's the worst form of romanticism, and we shouldn't buy into it. Okay? And then, non-normative sexual conditions are acknowledged in the Bible, Matthew 19. It talks about 3 different forms of eunuchs, or people who can't function within the bond of marriage. The Bible knows about these orientations, and it just acknowledges them and then says what to do with them. So it's not like the Bible didn't know about these things we know about now. All of our orientations are broken. That's our basic doctrine of sin. I'm not going to go into that right now. And, okay, I'm going to say this as a throwaway line. This is another 3-hour conversation. Some of you have heard lots of affirming arguments concerning the Bible. The Bible is gay affirming if you interpret it right. It's not. It's affirming of the human dignity of people who are oriented in homosexual or trans kinds of ways. It's very affirming of them as people made in God's image, people who are created to be loved. But it does not say, do what you want with your sexuality because you experience this. It doesn't say that. And you have to truly contort it and emotivize it to get it to say that. Okay. Okay, I want to say just a quick thing about... In the handout, this... Okay, I'm going to say 1 minute about this, and we're going to go through the 7 things in 7 seconds. Okay. One of the reasons why your kids are going to come home and spout gender ideology to you is what I would call the status empathy squeeze and then the bad deal intuition. The status empathy squeeze is this. All of your kids know that cool means status. They also know that there's a scarcity that they want to participate in. There's only so many awesome partners romantically. There's only so many places of prestige. There's only so many good colleges. There's only so many A's. There's only so many, right? They know they exist in scarcity. The people at the top of the status hierarchy get the best stuff. Kids call that cool. Cool. That's basically their word for status because it sounds cynical to say status, right? But that all it is it's a status formation. And so kids know they want to be as high as they can be on that status chart because there's true booty, there's true riches for the people the higher you are on the status chart, right? Now, additionally, they also know if you raise them in any kind of emotionally healthy way, they have empathy, right? But the philosophy they've been taught is expressive individualism. So, tell me your name again? Danny. So let's say Danny and I are talking. She's like, my marriage is so bad. I'm just struggling with my husband. I'm using her as an example because her husband was clearly a gentleman because he ran across the room to help her carry stuff earlier. So it's very hypothetical, right? So she's like, it's just so bad. I just don't know if I can stay married. I'm just so sad all the time, right? Now, listen. So, now naturally, I'm going to empathize with Danny because I don't like to be in pain, right? And Danny's in pain. So, I want to participate in stopping Danny's pain, right? And I know as a human being because of the natural law that I have some level of obligation to help Danny in her pain, right? Now, what immediately comes into my mind, without even knowing it based on my assumptions, is my moral philosophy. It feels like an emotion still, but I just immediately know what my moral obligations are. Now, if my moral philosophy is expressive individualism, what Danny has to be able to do to be happy is express herself and be herself. And clearly, her marriage is preventing that, right? So, what am I obligated to say to her? Oh, sweetie, you should leave. Right? And I feel that in the core of my moral self as part of my sense of compassion, which is connected to my conscience and at the root of my moral center. So, in both the best part of me, listening to my conscience, right? I want my empathy is going to move me treasonously because of the philosophy I've absorbed and don't even know about to tell her to do whatever she wants, right? So to go along with all of this. Also, in the worst part of me, I just want to eat my way up the hierarchy, which is also very natural. I want to be, and I know that if I go against this, I'm going to get bashed down the hierarchy and excluded. So for both my sense of survival and my sense of connection, I'm being squeezed emotionally to accept this ideology. Now, a lot of the power of that goes away if somebody knows that's happening to them. Sometimes we got to explain to our kids the emotional processes that are happening. Look, the reason you feel that way about your friend is because you have empathy. That's really good. You care about them. That's really, really, really good. But your friend is not just their 14-year-old self. She's going to be her 22-year-old self, and her 31-year-old self, and her 48-year-old self, and her 65-year-old self. And they're all your friend too. They're just not here right now because empathy can only see the thing that's right in front of them. What do you think her 46-year-old self would say to her in this moment? Do you think it would be go take some testosterone and get your breasts cut off? Are you sure? Are you sure? Right? Or is it worth getting knocked down the ladder to not play? Are you a person of power or a person of truth? Because the crazy thing about Jesus is that Jesus was a man of truth, no matter what power did to him. So these are major questions of discipleship. Okay, super quick, let me go through these things. What can you do right now? One, clarify what's confusing. How do you do that? One, think, listen, then speak. Think, listen, then speak. Parents, your words actually mean an awful lot to your kids, especially if you will listen to them and think about what they say before you use your words. Does that make sense? Second is remain calm. This whole movement is a movement of anxiety. They are themselves acting in a reactive way. They see anxiety all around them, their teachers and all the adults. If you can overcome your own anxiety and be truly calm in your love towards them, they're going to notice that, right? Or at least they have a shot at noticing it. If you are reactive, you're just like everybody else. You don't know who you are and you can't help them because they don't know who they are, right? They're not going to turn to somebody who doesn't know who they are. And anxiety shows that you're shaking. You're not differentiated. You're not clear, right? The third is show the good deal. I did get into the bad deal about this. Maybe you can ask that if you have a question about it. But we got to have women who show girls that it's great to be a woman. And we have to have men that show boys it's great to be a man. And we have to show girls that there are men who it's great to be married to. And we have to show boys that there are women who are great to be married to. And we have to show them that it's not making yourself permanently unhappy to have a child. Or more than one of them. They have to see it. And I have 100 more things I want to say about it. Okay. Check your own happiness and cheerfulness and anxiety level. If you want to hurt your own feelings, ask your kids if they think you're happy. A happy person. Ask your kids, do you think I'm a happy person? Do you think I like my life? Do you think I enjoy being your parent? And see what they say. Right? 5, focus on the premises, not the points. Don't just go against the thing they're saying. Ask yourself, what do they believe so that they could believe that? What do they believe so that they could believe that? And go at that thing, kindly. Because if they have some proposition they're spouting at you, part of it is they're just I'm different from you, I'm a kid, I'm going through differentiation, I'm just showing them different from you. And so just going against them, they don't want to back down. But if you go, okay, that's interesting, right? And then later you go, hey, do you believe this? What do you think about this? A premise. And just work on that. And then you work on this premise. And then work on that premise. And then, because here's the thing, they'll be much freer of the ideology if they convince themselves they don't believe it. Right? 6, parent for resilience and perseverance. Our culture is making extremely fragile kids. Right? Unsafe and fragile kids. That's going to continue for a while. Probably until your kids are in their 40s, is my guess. And so therefore, you have to parent for resilience. There's all kinds of stuff on the internet. Let me say this as a pastor. If you parent for resilience, you're discipling for perseverance. If you parent for resilience, you're discipling for perseverance. Disciple your kids for perseverance, you'll be working psychologically towards resilience. Work for resilience and then connect it to following Jesus, and it will help them towards perseverance. One example of this is helping them spiritually address their anxiety. Most of our kids are going to deal with anxiety. Helping them learn to actively deal with it courageously will make them more resilient. I encourage you to take them through the second half of Philippians 4. I think that's one of the best ways to do it. Cast your anxiety to Him. Let your gentleness to all connect yourself emotionally. Work through it with God. Then fill your mind with good stuff, not social media. Right? And then imitate worthwhile people and be around them. Do those 3 things and you will grow increasingly cured of anxiety, unless your anxiety is 85% physiological. And even if it is mostly physiological, it'll be the best it can be if you pursue that kind of way. Okay? I have handouts. There's a number of resources I can recommend, but I think you guys are going to have some discussion and then some Q&A. Let me just say this about the Q&A. I'm not a private person. I'm also not offendable, I don't think, in this kind of setting. If you have very antagonistic questions, you should ask them. And it's not going to hurt my feelings at all. I want you to ask the questions that you actually have.
Thank you, Nick.
All right, if you have any more votes, you want to get in there to order around the questions, you can.
That is something I didn't discuss. If you see a question on the slide, or if you scan that QR code, and there's a question, oh, that means, like, I want to know the answer to that question. And you click on that thumbs up, it'll move the question up higher for us. So if you take just a second as we start to go through it. Some of these questions, when we were looking through, the whole idea with this group is parent training, right? Like with parents, and some of the questions I was going to, as we go through these, I mean, that's a question I think our kids would have. That's a question I would have if my kids aren't interested in, you know. We want to try and focus on the questions that the kids would have, so that we're equipped to be able to answer the questions for them. And so I guess we can just start right now, and I'll go ahead and start at the top one. And it is more of a question for us, but it's similar, like me at work, using female pronouns. There, just went, look at that. This could get confusing. It got voted out. Well, there was a number one. We will start with that using pronouns question. There's 3 or 4 questions in there that one of them is under the guise of hospitality. Could we not be kind to our neighbor and just submit to their gender preference and call them by what we want, what he or she wants us to call them? Is that wrong? Is that okay? At work, same thing. My kid brings home a friend, and that friend has a different pronoun to what that I wouldn't necessarily agree with. What is our response to that as a believer?
Okay, so let me say a couple of things. There are a couple ways to look at this. Some of you have the reference to hospitality intimates a certain argument that can I, in order to try to be welcoming to someone, okay, that's going to do it. Hold on, does that work? If I just turn it? Let's try that for a second. Okay, that argument is pretty popular at some churches that are like trying to be like seeker sensitive, so to speak, or to align with culture as much as you can, so that you can talk about Jesus, right? There's a couple things I guess I'd say about that. The first is when I'm in contexts like that, I just try not to use pronouns, and sometimes that'll really torture my English to not have to use a pronoun. I just do. I sometimes do that when I'm around liberal Christians when I'm talking about God, because they like freak out if you refer to God as Him. You know, the Bible does constantly, and so they just contort their language to just say God again instead of Him. And in so doing, you're not breaking any rules, but you're making very clear that you're changing your language so as to not lie or say something you don't believe. And so they're getting the communication, but you're not actually quote misgendering them according to their own ideology. That's one approach that can be taken. Another one is to simply refuse. I think that's probably the most virtuous, but I don't know that it's obligatory. I don't know that I would say it's obligatory in every case. I would say this. If you are in a profession and in a place where that is happening, I think that in the realm of protest, the first responsibility is to go through the proper modes of protest before you engage in direct revolutionary protest. So to blow up the system and say, I'm not following the rules, right? Most of us in other situations would say, hey, not following the rules is not acceptable, right? If you're like, well, I don't like the fact that blah, blah, I'm going to break the window of Curtis's store. You'd be like, okay, you can't be doing that, right? So the first thing you have to do is like do whatever protest you can do before that, right? Otherwise, you can't do that. And that's, maybe it would be, quote, right to do it, but part of the way you show other people they can trust you, especially if you don't agree, is to do what you can. So the first thing I would do is, I would make a formal complaint. You can make an EEOC complaint and see where that goes. You're being discriminated in accordance with your religion. You could talk to lawyers, see what rights you do have, and so on. I think that's worth doing. I feel like to tell people, hey, look, don't play. I think that if you can do that, you should. So one of the things that Jordan Peterson has made popular is in Alexander Solzhenitsyn's The Gulag Archipelago, chapter 2, especially in the abridged version, this part is retained. he talks about how totalitarianism, or the control of people, is not substantiated by the people who tell lies, but the people who are willing to accommodate them. That if you, and so economists call this the free rider problem. If everybody goes along, then the person who pushes the thing just wins. But whoever goes against it takes damage. So everybody wants other people to go against the thing, to take the damage, so that you can free ride on the pain that they suffered, so that your life can be better, right? So if you're a worker, you may not want to go on strike, but you like that other people went on strike to get you the better wage, right? In this situation where people want you to profess lies, and you're like, well, I don't want to be the person who goes against this. Oh man, I sure hope somebody goes against this. See, that can be a road to perdition. Because nobody wants to be that person. Right? And so this is a really difficult reality. And so part of the issue is the people who should go against it are the people who are strong enough, courageous enough, in places where they can do it. So for example, I'm never going to do that, because I'm protected by the fact that I work in this church. Right? So I can misgender somebody, I can get attacked in the news, and as long as you don't turn against me, nobody can touch me. Unless it's just going to kill me or something, it's unlikely. So I'm not going to back down. When I'm in public forums, I say the stuff, right? I'm contemplating getting more public about that. And I think other people who have tenure, who are in places where they're more protected, I think they should have a stronger action on this. But frankly, until a surprising number of people begin to protest this, until 300 people show up at school board meetings, and look, you can have some of this ideology. We're not telling you to take the gay flags down. We know that we are not necessarily the complete majority here, but you are not going to teach our 6-year-olds that they're not little girls. You are not going to do that. Until that happens, they're going to teach your 6-year-old girl that she might be a boy. Here's the thing you got to understand about life. And I just taught a 5-year-old this today. Bullies don't stop until they're stopped. If people don't, if somebody, my dad was an old Anglo-Saxon, okay? His family was from England and England and England and England and England. And there's this ethic in the bones of Anglo-Saxons. You never force other people to do things. Unless there is an extreme reason to do it. You leave them alone. Right? That's all through C.S. Lewis's writings and Tolkien's writings, all the Anglophiles. There's this idea of this dignity of the human person, that you do not force people to do things. You do not engage in tyranny. Because Israel, tyranny, and Israel, England, and sub-Saharan Africa were the 3 most tyrannized places on the planet, probably. Except for some parts of China and Southeast Asia, probably. Just burned over. New rapists coming in every Midsummer's Eve, right? For 200 years, right? And they're just right? So that's kind of in my bones. And I think it's right. You do, and you have to recognize, if you submit to those people, there is no limiting principle to what they will take. People who don't say, look, your rights are your rights, and if they don't give them to you freely, and they don't show they're that kind of person, they have no limiting principle to how much they'll take from you. You're going to decide how much they take from you. And so you have to firmly, as non-violently as possible, say, you're not doing this. This is the door of my house. This is the place. This is my child. This is what I believe. This is what's in my head and not out in the world. You can't control it, and you're not going to control it. Right? And that's what all good protest is, from the civil rights movement to what Gandhi did in India and South Africa. There's this, you will not take this. I will not submit to it. So something like that has to happen. Some movement like that has to happen. And here's the thing, friends. The Republicans aren't going to do it. You understand? They don't have a light enough touch, right? The right that wants to vote for Donald Trump, they're right about some of these issues, but there's too much bull and too much China shop here. You understand? And somebody with enough dignity and enough who actually loves their enemy, right? Howard Thurman, who was a theologian who was a mentor of Martin Luther King, said the fundamental of individual dignity is your belief that your enemy can be won over to the beloved community. Right? If you believe another person is oppressing you a certain way, fundamental to you having dignity
is that your personhood is rooted in the fact that they are a person too, and you're trying to reach them. Does that make sense? And so your stopping the bully has to be directly connected to your loving your enemy. And it takes an extreme amount of virtue to do that. And I think it may take Christ to do that in these moments. So anyway, I have no prescription for you as a pastor. You should act according to your own conscience. If you lose your job, I'll do everything, and our church will do everything we can to find you a new one. I know people for whom they lost their job at Epic, and now they're making, like the wood tables in the room over there. That's somebody who stood up to their company, got fired, started building wood tables because people who buy wood tables can't fire them, and they're happier now. It happens. You can get a new job. So you do what you need to believe that if you stand before God, He'll say, yeah. Please God, not men. I mean, that's ultimately what it comes down to. But do it really wisely. And yes, get good advice before you do it. Okay, how can we have helpful conversations with our kids earlier? Is it possible to get ahead of the culture? Yeah, okay, so that's why I made my handout. Don't over-sexualize your kids, but start to have the conversations that make the bad ideology impossible. So we talk about what it means to be a girl. What does it mean to be a boy? What does it mean, right? And in my notes that you can send these up to if you want, there's a whole section on we have to teach little girls more than don't have sex before you're married. It's good to get married and you should have children, which is like classic evangelical / fundamentalist talk, right? So for example, there's this place in the Old Testament, and I think it's in Numbers 22, where it says if a young woman is accosted by a man, she has to scream if she's going to be raped, because if not, she is considered morally complicit. If she's raped out in the country where it doesn't make any difference, then she's assumed innocent and the man is killed. Okay? What that means is this. A Hebrew woman is morally strong enough and protective of her own sexuality that even in the face of force and harm, she will scream. You will not just take me. Okay? Here's the thing. I don't have enough hair on my legs to count the number of women who told me they'd been sexually assaulted and just froze and did nothing. The vast majority of women who are raped by the lighter definition of rape or sexually assaulted, they just let it happen to them. They're not mentally prepared to fight. Right? They're just not prepared to do it. We don't teach our kids to do that. We don't say, look, somebody might touch you someday. And you're going to kind of know what's wrong, but you're going to feel like you should freeze. You're not sure you should make a big deal about it. You should. You should scream. We're going to practice right now. Right? My wife literally did that with my older daughters. And there's a reason for that in my wife's past, why she felt like she had to teach that to our daughters very directly, right? So there's more to teach about sexuality and being a girl and being a boy and being a man and being a woman in the Bible than just the go-to old evangelical fundamentalist stuff. Marriage is good. Women should have children if they can. That's all fantastic. But there's more to teach about being a woman. The story of Abigail, standing up to a guy who's going to be king and saving him from the moral destruction of his entire life because she steps into the gap when a man is stupid. Something to be learned there, right? So I think there's lots of things to teach our kids about sexuality, gender, marriage, fertility, all that kind of stuff that precedes their sexualization. Does that make sense? And then once you get to those, you are going to have to teach your kids more faster than you want to. I don't know any way around that. Okay. How do we protect our children, and what rights do we have in regards to the rules of transgender opposite sex genders? I'll mention some. The answer is you don't have a lot of rights. There are some. This is why there have to be lawsuits. Okay, they're going to have to be lawsuits because some people are going to have to sue. So, for example, not very long ago, I was helping some lawyers get names together of parents who could confirm that their kids were being taught radical gender ideology as young as 6 years old in our system right here in Madison, and they threatened a lawsuit. They got a bunch of names together. They got affidavits, and they began to do a lawsuit against Madison Metro. And Madison Metro pulled back for a little bit. Not much, not for very long, but a little. And then we got Superintendent Jenkins, who is not super big on was not super big on this. And he did some really cool things. He kicked some LGBT groups out of some of the schools who are bullying teachers and stuff like that. So even in Madison, if there's some focus on certain things, you can make some headway within public systems and so on if you are a minority with guts, right? But like right now, I do not think that that believers are showing up. One of the reasons why I spent time becoming friends with Bishop Hying of the Roman Catholic Church is because as much as the people who planted this church would probably say Catholics were like anathema and going to hell, which just to be clear is not the historic Protestant view. Right? Catholics have always said we're not part of the church for a long time. Now, I don't think they say that exactly like that now, but that was the historical Catholic view. The historical Protestant view for Luther and Calvin was that the Roman Catholic Church was a true church. It just had a lot of problems. And that those should be reformed and always reforming. And dang it if the Protestants weren't going to try to do that the best they could in their churches. But they believed that the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church were true churches. They had true sacraments and true baptisms and a true priesthood. But they should clean up their corruption and they should clean up their bad doctrine. Right? That's my view too. I take a magisterial reform view rather than an American fundamentalist, secular Baptist view. Okay, so one of the reasons I moved towards Bishop Hying is because the Roman Catholic churches and churches like ours believe the same stuff on this stuff. And if we don't do something, it's going to be bad. So you might see my name in the news. I may ask you to come to some things. But like and we're going to take like very clear action when that happens. But something has to be done. The most important thing, and I have not made the kind of headway that I'm looking for here, and this is going to be uncomfortable, is I think that the real alliance has to be with black churches. However, in order for us to have those alliances with black churches, we're going to have to listen to them about things like reading standards and school accessibility and changes that they're really interested in, and that to them are even more salient than this stuff. Does that make sense? Because they have to break a coalition. They normally make a coalition with LGBTQ advocacy organizations to get the political stuff that they want, which is mostly funding. And so if people like Sheila Stubbs is going to partner with us, who's a Democratic state senator, like it's got to be for like a really clear reason. So I think that building that coalition is necessary. I've been spending time doing it, and hopefully it'll produce some fruit. But like the reason I'm doing that is because there aren't a lot of rights. The worst thing that could possibly happen rights-wise for you is for you to get a divorce. So if you're really concerned about this, work on your marriage. Because most of the horrific cases of this are a kid says, I want to transition. The parents are divorced. One parent's like, no way. And the other parent is, uh-huh. And the court immediately sides with the affirming parent in every case. Work on your marriage. Get on the same page with each other. So that if that moment comes, you are a single front. You, your spouse, and your lawyer are all on the same team. Okay? And also, remember, your school, if you're going to public school, your school will hide from you your kids' influence decision as long as they possibly can. They will not tell you. They will help your kid get new clothes at school. They will help your kid get testosterone or puberty blockers. They will call them by a new name. They will affirm their transition. They will do all of that stuff. And they will try to make sure you don't find out. They will actively hide it from you. Especially if your kid intimates that you might not be crazy about the idea. And so don't think that if something like this happened at school, you'd be told. You will not be told. Do you understand? Okay. All right. What are the best ways to show someone who has chosen to be transgender in your own family the love of Christ? That's just too contextualized a question. I think it would have a lot to do with like the person, what your relationship with them is, and all that kind of stuff. You know? Sacrifice is the language of love. So, being there when nobody else is there, doing things that nobody else does, those are things people notice. And if you do that, then you cannot be in lockstep with everybody else. And to the extent to which they're a thoughtful person, they'll pick up on it. But for the most part, you should brace yourself for being hated. Because sadly, I can't get that right now. There's a reason why that is, but okay. Who is teaching 6-year-old girls that they may be boys? I keep hearing anecdotes that sound like fear-mongering. Teachers I talk to say this isn't happening. Contact Our Duty. Some of the people that are on my list, you can contact some of those organizations and ask if they can give you concrete examples, and it just depends on how long you can stay on the phone. It is happening. as a pastor, I have talked specifically to people who came to me after their kid came home. The reason I'm using that example is because I'm thinking of a particular person right now. But I've heard this a number of times. One of the reasons why there may be a Christian high school on the west side is this reason. We literally had a couple dozen parents come to us and say, this has to stop. We've gone to the schools. We've asked them to stop teaching our kids this. They won't stop. They keep pushing this on our kids. We just have to get them out of there. I want my kids to be in the mission field of the school and all that kind of stuff, but my kid is not a missionary. They're being psychologically mistreated. I just don't think I can keep my kids there. Because this was happening in each of these families with multiple children. So, okay, here's where I'm a little bit on your team if you wrote that question. That someday I'm going to take the day off and I'm going to go to the schools where I've been told there's litter boxes for kids who identify as animals. I feel like I need to personally see that, like in real life, to believe it's being done. I've seen news reports. I've heard eyewitnesses say that such a thing has happened in different places in the country. But when I hear about it happening here, I'm going to have to go to the school and literally go see it. Because here's part of the reason. Because there's part of me that wants to believe it. So I can say these people have gone so nuts. It's right? So do you remember when Act 10 passed and there was all the rioting people living in the Capitol? And there was this news report that came out that they had done $10 million of damage. And I was like, see, those dumb rioters. And I totally bought it because I wanted to, right? And it turned out it was 420,000 in damage. It was a good bit, but it wasn't anywhere near that much, But I wanted to believe that because I didn't like those people, you know what I mean? And so I was like, oh, that's a lesson. I need to learn that lesson. So next time when I do hear that, I will take a day off and I will go down and confirm that the litter box is in that classroom, and then I will tell you that it happened. But I have been told directly by very credible people that is happening. Are there any more questions?
Yes, that's all we got time.
All right.
Again, I want to reiterate the resources that we'll be emailing out. If you RSVP, then you'll be getting some resources. We're going to add the slides to the from the presentation in that email. If you didn't RSVP, you can go find the email that asked you to RSVP and then do it, and then you'll get the email, or give me your email and we'll get that done. Other than that, I'm going to close some prayers real quick. And, pick up for the kids.